Every woman in town threw herself at him. The stranger with the scar like a snake across his face. Mysterious, dangerous, beautiful. He ignored them all. But every single day he walked into her store. The one woman who never looked up, never smiled, never chased. She had been burned before. Trusted a man who stole everything and left her father to die of a broken heart. She swore she'd never trust again. Then he told her the truth. I killed a man, and his brother is coming to burn this town to the ground, looking for me. Now she has to choose. Protect her heart, or fight beside the outlaw she swore she'd never love. The lesson: she never chased him. And because of that, he stopped running. Sometimes the love that transforms us is the one that sees us, scars and all, and chooses to stay anyway. This story proves that second chances exist for those brave enough to be honest about who they were and who they want to become. Comment below. Have you ever met someone who made you want to stop running? Like if you believe people can change. Share with someone who needs this story. And subscribe, because love stories like this are worth fighting for. The heat that day was brutal. The kind of heat that made horses sluggish and tempers short. Main Street was mostly empty, folks hiding in whatever shade they could find. So when the sound of hooves echoed down the dusty road, people noticed. A child named Tommy Porter was the first to see him clearly. The boy was sitting on his mother's porch, escaping his afternoon chores, when the rider came into view. Tommy tugged his mother's sleeve. "Mama, that man has a scar like a snake on his face." His mother looked up. Her hand flew to her chest. "Lord have mercy." The stranger was tall in the saddle, broad shoulders, dark hair curling at his collar. He would have been handsome, movie star handsome, if not for the scar. It ran from his left eyebrow down to his jaw, a white river of healed flesh cutting across his cheek. His name was Caleb Rohr, though nobody in Dry Creek knew that yet. What they saw was a man who looked dangerous, a man who wore his gun low and tied down, a man whose eyes scanned every rooftop and alleyway like he expected trouble. He was expecting trouble. He had been expecting it for 3 years. Caleb guided his gray horse to the livery stable and dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life in the saddle than out of it. He paid the stable boy with coins that rang true on the wooden counter. The boy stared at the scar. Caleb was used to that. "Got a room available in this town?" Caleb asked. The boy pointed. "Widow Patterson runs the boarding house, 2 streets over. She will put you up if you got money and manners." "I got both." Caleb collected his saddlebags and walked into town. Behind him, the whispers had already started. By the time he reached the boarding house, half the unmarried women in Dry Creek had found reasons to be near their windows. Martha Hendricks, who worked at the boarding house, nearly dropped a stack of clean linens when she saw him walk through the door. She recovered quickly, smoothing her hair with one hand. "Welcome to Dry Creek, stranger. You needing a room?" "Yes, ma'am." "Week at a time, if that works." "Works just fine." Martha could not stop staring at the scar. "Where are you coming from?" "East." "And where are you heading?" Caleb almost smiled. That was the question, was it not? He had been heading nowhere for 3 years. Running from everywhere. "Have not decided yet," he said. Martha showed him to a small room on the 2nd floor. Clean bed, washstand, window overlooking Main Street. It would do. That night, Caleb sat in the saloon and drank whiskey alone. Men tried to strike up conversations. Women tried to catch his eye. He was polite to all of them. Friendly, even. But he kept his distance. Someone eventually asked about the scar. "Reminder," Caleb said, his voice flat. "Reminder not to trust the wrong people." He did not elaborate. Nobody pressed. Later, in his room at the boarding house, Caleb tried to sleep. He rarely succeeded. The nightmares always came. 3 years of running had not outpaced them. That night was no different. He dreamed of Phoenix, of the knife, of the blood spreading across the saloon floor, of Garrett's face when he found out, of running, always running, never stopping long enough to breathe. Caleb woke with a shout, his hand already wrapped around the knife under his pillow. He was on his feet, blade raised, before he realized he was alone. The room was empty. The threat was only in his head. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking. He needed a drink. He always needed a drink after the nightmares. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out at the sleeping town. That was when he noticed the light. 2 in the morning, and one building still had a lamp burning. The general store on the corner of Main and Douglas. Hale General Store, according to the sign. Caleb watched the light for a long moment. Someone else in this town could not sleep either. Someone else was carrying weight too heavy to set down. He did not know it yet, but that someone was the woman who would change everything. Her name was Evelyn Hale. At that exact moment, Evelyn was hunched over her ledger, checking her numbers for the 3rd time. The result was the same. She was $47 short of making her payment to the bank next month. $47. It might as well have been $47,000. Her father had left her this store when he died 2 years ago. He had also left her a mountain of debt she was still climbing. Every month was a battle. Every dollar counted. Evelyn rubbed her eyes and tried to focus. She was 27 years old. In Dry Creek terms, that made her a spinster. She did not care. She did not have time to care. Marriage was a luxury for women who were not fighting to keep a roof over their heads. Her friend Martha had burst into the store earlier that day, breathless with excitement. "Evelyn, you have to see this man who just rode into town. He is the most beautiful thing I have ever laid eyes on." Evelyn had not looked up from her inventory. "Beautiful things are usually expensive and useless, Martha. I cannot afford either. But the scar makes him look so dangerous and mysterious. Dangerous and mysterious are just fancy words for trouble. And I definitely cannot afford trouble." Martha had pouted. "You are impossible. I am practical. There is a difference." But now, alone in the dark with her failing numbers, Evelyn allowed herself one moment of weakness. She walked to the window and looked out at the town. Her eyes found the boarding house. A single light was burning in an upstairs window. Someone else was awake at this ungodly hour. For just a moment, Evelyn wondered about the stranger with the scar. Where had he come from? What was he running from? Then she shook her head and returned to her ledger. It did not matter. Strangers came and went. Debts stayed forever. The next morning, Caleb made his way to the general store. He needed supplies: coffee, beans, ammunition. The basics of survival. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. The woman behind the counter did not look up. "Help you," she said. Her voice was cool, professional, completely uninterested. Caleb was not used to that. Women always looked at him. Even with the scar, maybe especially with the scar, they looked. Some with attraction, some with fear, some with morbid curiosity. But they always looked. This woman kept her eyes on her ledger. "Need some supplies," Caleb said. "Coffee, beans, box of ammunition for a Colt 45. Coffee is on the left wall, beans are next to it. Ammunition is behind the counter. I will get it when you are ready." He gathered his items, taking his time, studying her without being obvious about it. She was not beautiful, not in the way that turned heads. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a practical knot. Her gray eyes were serious, focused. Her dress was simple, clean, chosen for function rather than fashion. But there was something about her, a stillness, a self-containment. She did not need anyone to notice her. She was complete on her own. Caleb found that fascinating. He set his items on the counter. She tallied them without hesitation, her mind calculating faster than most men could manage with paper and pencil. $3.50. He paid without haggling. That surprised her enough to make her glance up briefly. Their eyes met for half a second. Something passed between them, something neither could name. Then she looked back down at her ledger. "You are new in town," she observed. Not quite a question. "Yes, ma'am." Caleb roared. "Ma'am." Caleb. "Evelyn Hale, I run the store. Planning to stay long, Mr. Rohr?" "Have not decided yet." She nodded, already turning back to her work. People rarely stay. Dry Creek is not much to look at. Maybe I am not looking for much." That made her pause. She looked at him again. Really looked this time. Saw the scar. Saw the weariness behind his easy smile. Saw the gun worn low, and the way he stood, always ready, always alert. "Mr. Rohr," she said slowly, "I do not know what you are running from. But if it follows you here, I would appreciate if you kept it away from my store." Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. She was perceptive. Too perceptive. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "I will do my best." He gathered his supplies and left. The bell chimed behind him. Evelyn stared at the closed door for a long moment. Then she shook her head and went back to her numbers. She had enough problems without adding mysterious strangers to the list. But that night, when she finally blew out her lamp at 2 in the morning, she noticed the light still burning in the boarding house window. And she wondered. Over the next 2 weeks, Caleb Rohr became a fixture in Dry Creek. He took odd jobs around town, fixed fences for the ranchers outside of town, repaired the sagging porch on Widow Patterson's boarding house, helped old Mr. Miller replace the roof on his barn. He never asked for payment. When people insisted, he named prices so low they were almost insulting. Word spread quickly. The stranger with the scar was a hard worker and a good man. The women of Dry Creek noticed other things. He worked shirtless in the summer heat. His body was lean and muscled, scarred in places besides his face. He moved with an easy grace that spoke of confidence. And when he smiled, really smiled, it transformed his whole face. Rachel Porter told her friend Constance, "If I were not engaged, I would throw myself at that man so fast he would not know what hit him." Constance fanned herself dramatically. "Even engaged, I am tempted." But Caleb showed no interest in any of them. He was polite, friendly, helpful, and completely unavailable. He only had eyes for one woman. The problem was, she refused to have eyes for him. Caleb found excuses to visit the general store almost every day. He needed nails, then a new shirt, then rope, then a whetstone, then tobacco, even though he did not smoke. Every time, Evelyn treated him exactly the same. Cool professionalism, quick transactions, no small talk. It was driving him crazy. "That is $4 even," she said on his 5th visit as she wrapped his completely unnecessary purchase of candles. "You are very efficient," Caleb observed. "Time is money, Mr. Rohr, and I do not have much of either." Most women would have smiled at a comment like that, made it into a joke, opened a door for further conversation. Evelyn just held out her hand for payment. Caleb tried a different approach. "I noticed you keep late hours. Your light is on when I wake up most nights." Finally, a reaction. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You watch my store at night?" "No." He held up his hands. "I mean, yes, but not like that. I just noticed because I do not sleep well either." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. Then she surprised him. "The nightmares," she said quietly. "You get them too." It was not a question. Caleb felt something shift in his chest. "Yes, every night." She nodded slowly like she understood. Then she handed him his change and turned back to her ledger. $4 even, Mr. Rohr. Was there anything else?" The door had closed. Whatever crack he had found in her armor, she had sealed it shut. But Caleb was not discouraged. If anything, he was more intrigued than ever. That afternoon, Martha found Evelyn restocking shelves with unnecessary force. "All right," Martha said, leaning against the counter. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. You are putting canned peaches in the bean section." Evelyn looked down, cursed under her breath, started reorganizing. Martha watched her with knowing eyes. "This is about the stranger, is it not? Caleb Rohr. I do not know what you are talking about." "Evelyn, every unmarried woman in this town has thrown herself at that man. Half the married ones, too. And he is not interested in any of them. But he comes to your store every single day. He needs supplies. Nobody needs that many candles." Evelyn slammed a can down harder than necessary. "What do you want me to say, Martha? That I find him attractive?" Fine. He is attractive. That I wonder about him? Fine. I wonder. But I have been down this road before. Martha's expression softened. Daniel was different. Was he? Evelyn turned to face her friend. He was charming. He was handsome. Perfect. Everyone loved him. And then he stole my father's money and disappeared. My father died of a broken heart 3 months later. So excuse me if I am not eager to fall for another too-good-to-be-true stranger. Martha reached out and squeezed her hand. Not everyone leaves. In my experience, everyone leaves. The ones who seem perfect leave the fastest. That night, Evelyn stayed late at the store again. The bank payment was coming due. She was still short. She was so focused on her ledger that she did not hear the door open, did not hear the footsteps, only heard the voice. Well, 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 look what we found. Evelyn's head snapped up. 2 men stood in her store. Ranch hands by the look of them, drunk by the smell of them. Store is closed, she said, keeping her voice steady. That is not very friendly. The bigger one smiled, showing yellow teeth. We just want some company, then go to the saloon. But you are prettier than anyone at the saloon. They moved closer. Evelyn's hand slid under the counter, finding the pistol she kept there. I am going to ask you once to leave, she said. Her voice did not shake. Her hand did not either. The men laughed. Or what? Or I shoot you both and tell the sheriff you tried to rob me. Their laughter died. The big one squinted at her. You would not dare. Evelyn pulled out the pistol and cocked it in one smooth motion. Try me. They stared at the gun, stared at her steady hands and cold eyes. Whatever they saw there sobered them up fast. Crazy woman, one of them muttered as they backed toward the door. Not worth the trouble. They left. The bell chimed behind them. Evelyn stood frozen for a long moment, pistol still raised. Then her hands started shaking. Her whole body started shaking. She set down the gun and gripped the counter, forcing herself to breathe. That was when she heard the voice from the shadows. You all right? She spun. Caleb Rohr was standing just inside the back door. His gun was in his hand, but lowered. Were you there the whole time? Evelyn demanded. I was coming to check on you, saw them go in. By the time I got close, you already had it handled. Then why are you still here? Caleb holstered his gun and stepped closer. Because handling something and being fine after are 2 different things. Evelyn wanted to tell him to leave. Wanted to insist she was fine, but her hands were still shaking and he could see it. I do not need rescuing, she said. I know. He stopped a few feet away. I was not offering to rescue you. I was just asking if you were okay. Something in his voice made her pause. He was not trying to be a hero. He was not trying to swoop in and save her. He was just asking. That distinction mattered more than she expected. The scar, she said suddenly. Does it still hurt? Caleb touched his cheek, surprised by the question. At first it did. Now it is just a reminder. Of what? Of a mistake I made. A man I trusted. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have scars too. You just cannot see them. They stood there in the darkened store, 2 broken people recognizing something in each other, something familiar, something painful. Then Evelyn straightened her spine and lifted her chin. Thank you for checking on me, Mr. Rohr, but I am fine now. You can go. Caleb nodded slowly. He turned toward the door, then stopped. You know, he said without looking back, I have met a lot of people in a lot of towns. Most of them look at me like I am a hero or a monster. You are the first person who just looks at me like I am a person. You are a person. Some days I forget that. He left before she could respond. Evelyn stood alone in her store, staring at the door he had closed behind him. Her heart was beating too fast. Her mind was racing too fast. She should not care about this man. She should not wonder about his past. She should not want to know why he had nightmares, why he carried himself like someone expecting attack, why he looked at her like she was the first real thing he had seen in years. She should not, but she did. That night she blew out her lamp at midnight instead of 2 in the morning. And when she looked at the boarding house, his window was dark too. Maybe for the first time in a long time, they were both actually sleeping. The next morning, Evelyn opened her store at dawn as usual. Caleb was already waiting outside. "I do not need more candles," she said. "Good. I do not want candles." He held up a hammer. "I noticed your back step is loose. Mind if I fix it?" "Why would you do that?" "Because you almost fell yesterday when those men ran out. Because a loose step is dangerous. Because I want to help." Evelyn studied him. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing. Everyone wants something." Caleb met her eyes steadily. "I want a reason to stay in one place. I want to do honest work for honest people. I want to stop running." He paused. "And I want to know you better. But that is not payment. That is just truth." Evelyn should have said no. Should have shut the door and gone back to her ledger and her safe, lonely routine. Instead, she stepped aside. "The step is in back," she said. "And you break it worse, you buy me a new one." "Yes, ma'am," he smiled. Not the charming smile he used on everyone else. Something smaller, more real. Evelyn went back to her ledger. But she could not focus on the numbers. She kept listening to the sound of hammering from the back porch. And she kept wondering what it would feel like to stop running, too. 3 weeks after Caleb Rohr rode into Dry Creek, the whole town was talking about him. But not for the reasons they expected. He fixed Widow Patterson's fence without being asked. He helped the Miller family raise a new barn when the old one collapsed. He broke up a fight outside the saloon without throwing a single punch, just stepping between 2 drunk cowboys and talking them down with calm words and steady eyes. "He is too good to be true," Sarah Mitchell, the postmaster's wife, declared at the weekly sewing circle. "Mark my words, a man like that has secrets." She was right about that, but not in the way she imagined. Evelyn watched all of this from her store. She watched the women flutter around Caleb like moths to flame, watched Martha sigh dreamily every time he walked past, watched the whole town fall in love with the mysterious stranger. And she watched Caleb ignore all of it. He still came to her store every day, not to buy things anymore, just to talk, or more accurately, just to sit in comfortable silence while she worked. At first, Evelyn found it strange. Then she found it comforting. Then she found it necessary. She would never admit that last part. One afternoon, Caleb was helping her move heavy crates in the back storeroom. Her back had been aching for days, and he had noticed her wincing when she lifted things. "You should let me do the heavy lifting," he said, setting down a crate of tinned goods. "I have been doing the heavy lifting for 2 years. That does not mean you have to do it forever." Evelyn paused, a strange expression crossing her face. "My father used to say that, right before he died." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about him." She should not have. She had not talked about her father to anyone except Martha. But something about Caleb made her want to share. "He was a good man," she said slowly. "Terrible with money, but good. He trusted people, believed the best in everyone, even when they proved him wrong over and over again. Even your fiancé?" Evelyn flinched. Martha had been talking. Of course she had. Especially Daniel. "My father loved him like a son." Which made it worse when Daniel stole $200 and disappeared the night before our wedding. Caleb set down the crate he was holding. "What happened to your father?" Evelyn's voice went flat. "He had a heart attack 3 months later. Doctor said it was the strain. I say it was the heartbreak." He trusted Daniel completely. The betrayal broke something inside him. "I am sorry. Everyone is sorry. Sorry does not pay the debt Daniel left behind. Sorry does not bring my father back." She grabbed another crate, lifting it with more force than necessary. The edge caught on a shelf, and the whole thing tipped. Cans went rolling across the floor. "Damn it," Evelyn muttered, dropping to her knees to gather them. Caleb knelt beside her, helping collect the scattered goods. Their hands touched over a can of peaches. Neither pulled away. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She looked up. His face was serious, more serious than she had ever seen it. "The scar on my face, I got it from a man named Phoenix. We were in the same gang. Outlaws, robbers. I rode with them for 3 years. Evelyn's hand tightened on the can. Her heart started beating faster, but she did not move away. 3 years ago, I decided to leave. Phoenix tried to stop me. He came at me with a knife. I killed him. And then I ran. He met her eyes directly. I am not a good man, Evelyn. I have done terrible things. I came to Dry Creek because I was tired of running, because I wanted to find some place I could stop. But you deserve to know who you have been talking to. Evelyn was silent for a long moment. Her mind raced through possibilities. Fear, anger, betrayal. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Recognition. Why did you tell me this? She asked. Because you have been lied to before. Because I did not want to be another liar. What do you want from me? Caleb shook his head slowly. Nothing. I just wanted you to know the truth. What you do with it is your choice. He stood and headed for the door. Caleb. He stopped but did not turn around. The man you killed, Evelyn said. Phoenix. Why did he come at you with a knife? Because I stopped him from hurting someone. A woman. He was going to do something terrible to her, and I could not let that happen. When I tried to stop him, he attacked me. Evelyn absorbed this. And the gang leader? Garrett? Caleb's shoulders tensed. Garrett saved my life when I was 19. Took me in when I had nothing. He was like a father to me. He paused. Phoenix was his brother. His real brother. Blood family. And I killed him. He walked out without another word. Evelyn sat alone on the storeroom floor, surrounded by scattered cans, her whole world tilting on its axis. That evening, Sheriff Tom Dockery found Caleb sitting on the steps of the boarding house staring at nothing. Dockery was a big man, thick through the chest with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He had been sheriff of Dry Creek for 15 years. He knew trouble when he saw it. He also knew redemption when he saw it. Mind if I sit? Dockery asked. Free country. Dockery lowered himself onto the step with a grunt. Getting old. Knees are not what they used to be. Caleb said nothing. I know who you are, Dockery said calmly. Caleb Rohr. Rode with the Garrett gang out of Arizona Territory. Wanted for robbery, cattle rustling, and the killing of Phoenix Garrett in Prescott. Caleb's hand moved toward his gun by instinct, then stopped. You going to arrest me? Not today. Caleb looked at him sharply. Why not? Dockery was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. 30 years ago, I was not much different from you. Different gang, different crimes, but the same story. Young and stupid and running with the wrong crowd. What changed? A man gave me a chance. Sheriff in a town called Red River. He saw something in me that I did not see in myself. He let me start over. Caleb stared at him. Why are you telling me this? Because I have watched you for 3 weeks. I have seen you help people without asking for payment. I have seen you walk away from fights you could have won. I have seen you treat everyone in this town with respect, even the ones who do not deserve it. Dockery turned to face him directly. Whatever you were before, you are trying to be something different now. I respect that. So here is my offer. You keep your head down, keep helping people, keep being the man I have seen you be. And I forget about those wanted posters. You slip up, you hurt anyone in my town, and I put you in chains myself. Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he said, You know Garrett will come eventually. He does not forgive. He does not forget. I know. People could get hurt. People always get hurt. The question is whether it is worth the risk. Dockery stood, his knees popping. I think you are worth the risk, son. Do not prove me wrong. He walked away, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts. That night there was a knock on Evelyn's back door. Late, past midnight. She grabbed her pistol before answering. It was Caleb. I was not sure you would open the door, he said. I was not sure I would either. She did not lower the gun. What do you want? To ask you something. Ask. You know what I am now. What I was. Do you want me to leave? Evelyn considered the question. Considered the man standing in front of her, scarred and broken and trying so hard to be better. My father believed everyone deserved a second chance, she said slowly. I used to think that was naive, that people do not change, that they just get better at hiding who they really are. And now I think maybe change is possible. But only if someone is willing to do the work. Only if they are honest about who they were and who they want to become. She finally lowered the pistol. You told me the truth when you could have lied. You stopped a man from hurting a woman, even though it cost you everything. Those are not the actions of a bad man. I have done bad things. So have I. She stepped aside. Come inside. It is cold out there, and I think we have a lot more to talk about. Caleb hesitated. Then he stepped through the door. They talked until dawn. About his past. About her past. About Daniel and Garrett and all the ways people hurt each other. About the possibility, however small, of starting over. When the sun came up, Caleb stood to leave. Evelyn, he said from the doorway. I do not know what is going to happen. I do not know if Garrett is coming or when. But I want you to know something. What? He turned to face her. You are the first person in 3 years who has made me want to stop running. Then he left, and Evelyn stood alone in her kitchen, watching the sun rise over a world that suddenly felt different, more dangerous, but also more hopeful. Something changed between Caleb and Evelyn after that night. Nothing obvious, nothing the town could gossip about. But the air between them was different, charged. They still kept their distance in public. Evelyn still treated him like any other customer when he came into the store. Caleb still kept to himself, helping around town, sleeping poorly, fighting his demons alone. But in the quiet hours, late at night when the town was sleeping, they found each other. Sometimes he came to her back door. Sometimes she watched for his light in the boarding house window and went to him. They talked about everything and nothing, about the past that haunted them, about the future they were afraid to imagine. They did not touch, did not kiss, did not cross that line, but they wanted to. God, they wanted to. One evening, a storm rolled in from the mountains, the kind of storm that turned the sky green and made animals nervous. Rain came down in sheets, turning Main Street into a river of mud. Caleb had been helping Mr. Miller reinforce his barn against the wind. By the time he made it back to town, he was soaked through and shivering. The general store was the closest shelter. Evelyn looked up when he stumbled through the door, dripping water everywhere. She did not say anything, just pointed to the back room, where she kept a small stove burning. Get dry, she said. I will make coffee. He found towels and stripped off his soaked shirt, rubbing himself down until his skin stopped feeling like ice. When Evelyn came in with 2 cups of coffee, she stopped short. She had seen shirtless men before. This was the frontier. Modesty was a luxury. But she had never seen Caleb like this, had never seen the other scars that marked his body. A puckered bullet wound on his shoulder. A long slash across his ribs. Burns on his forearm that looked deliberate. He caught her staring and pulled on a dry shirt from a pile she kept for emergencies. Sorry, he said. Should have warned you. Where did you get those? The scars? Caleb sat down across from her, wrapping his hands around the warm coffee cup. Here and there, most of them from fights. The burns were from Garrett. Garrett burned you? He called it discipline. When I made mistakes, when I questioned orders, he would hold my arm over a fire until I learned my lesson. Evelyn's stomach turned. That is not discipline. That is torture. It is what I knew. Garrett saved my life. He fed me when I was starving, gave me clothes when I had rags, taught me how to survive. I thought the pain was just part of the deal. He stared into his coffee. It took me a long time to understand that love is not supposed to hurt like that. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Daniel never hurt me physically. But the lies were their own kind of torture. Every sweet word was a weapon. Every promise was a trap. By the end, I did not know what was real anymore. That is why you do not trust easily. That is why I do not trust at all. You trust me. She looked at him. Against my better judgment, yes. Why? Because you told me the truth. Because you did not pretend to be perfect. Because, she hesitated. Because when you look at me, you see the real me. Not the store owner or the spinster or the woman everyone thinks is too hard and too cold. You see the parts I hide. And you do not run away. Caleb set down his cup. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. Just held it. Nothing more. I am not going to run, he said quietly. Not from you. Whatever comes, I am staying right here. They sat like that while the storm raged outside. Two people finding warmth in each other. Two people who had forgotten what connection felt like, remembering. Finally, Evelyn pulled her hand away. This is dangerous, she said. Getting attached. Garrett is still out there. The past does not just disappear because we want it to. I know. If he comes here, people will get hurt. I know that too. Then why stay? Why not run again? Find another town, start over fresh? Caleb stood and walked to the window, watching the rain pound against the glass. Because I am tired of running, he said. Because every town I have been to, I have been a ghost. Here, for the first time, I feel real. You make me feel real. He turned to face her. And because leaving would mean leaving you. And I am not willing to do that. Evelyn should have argued, should have pushed him away for both their sakes. Instead, she stood and crossed to where he was standing. You are going to get us both killed, she said. Probably. I should throw you out right now. Probably. She reached up and touched his scarred cheek. Her fingers traced the white line from his eyebrow to his jaw. I'm not good at this, she whispered. At trusting. At feeling. I built walls for a reason. I know. But when I am with you, those walls feel like a prison instead of protection. Caleb covered her hand with his own, pressing it against his cheek. We do not have to figure everything out tonight, he said. We can just be here, right now. Two people who found each other in a storm. Evelyn nodded slowly. Okay, okay. They stayed like that until the storm passed, not touching beyond that single point of contact, not crossing any lines, just existing together in the quiet. When the clouds broke and moonlight spilled through the window, Caleb finally stepped back. I should go, he said, before people start talking. Let them talk. He smiled, that almost smile that was becoming familiar. That is not you talking. That is the storm. Maybe the storm knows something I do not. But she let him go, watched him disappear into the wet night, stood at her window until she saw his light come on at the boarding house. Then she went back to her ledger and tried to pretend her whole world had not just shifted. The next morning, Sheriff Dockery stopped by the store. Miss Hale, he said, tipping his hat. Got a moment? For you, always. He glanced around to make sure they were alone, then lowered his voice. There was a stranger passing through last night. Did not stop, just rode through real slow, like he was looking for something or someone. Evelyn's blood went cold. What did he look like? Older? Hard. Had a look like he was used to giving orders and having them followed. Dockery met her eyes. I think Garrett is sending scouts, testing our defenses, figuring out if his target is really here. What should we do? For now, nothing. Stay alert. Keep that pistol close, and maybe let Roar know to watch his back. Evelyn nodded tightly. Thank you, Sheriff. Dockery paused at the door. You know, he said casually, I have seen a lot of things in my years wearing this badge. I have seen good people do bad things. I have seen bad people find redemption. But I have never seen two people more stubbornly determined to pretend they do not care about each other. I do not know what you mean. Sure you do not. He tipped his hat again. Have a good day, Miss Hale. Storm is coming. Might want to batten down the hatches. He left. And Evelyn knew he was not talking about the weather. It happened on a Tuesday. Evelyn was behind the counter calculating her monthly expenses when the door opened. She did not look up at first. Customers came and went all day. Then she heard the voice, looking for a man. Tall, dark hair, scar on his face like a snake. Goes by Roar. Evelyn's pen froze. She lifted her head slowly. 3 men stood in her store. Trail-worn, hard-eyed, dangerous. They had the look of men who had done terrible things and slept just fine afterward. The one who spoke was the oldest, maybe 40, with a scar of his own running from his left eye to his jaw. He was studying her with cold calculation. "Do not know anyone by that description," Evelyn said calmly. "That is funny, because half this town says he spends most of his time right here in your store." The man stepped closer. His hand rested on his gun belt. Casual, threatening. "Name's Coleman. I ride with Garrett. Maybe you have heard of us. I have heard of a lot of things. Does not mean I pay attention to any of them." Coleman smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "You have a mouth on you. Garrett would like that. He enjoys breaking spirited women." Evelyn's hand slid under the counter toward her pistol. "If you're here to shop, buy something. If you're here to threaten me, get out. We are here for Roar. 3 years he rode with us. 3 years he was family. Then he killed the boss's brother and ran like a coward." The door to the back room opened. Caleb stepped out. His gun was already drawn. "Let her go, Coleman. This is between me and Garrett." Coleman's smile widened. "Well, well, well, hiding behind a woman's skirts now, Roar. How the mighty have fallen. I said let her go." Coleman released Evelyn's arm. She did not realize he had grabbed it until she felt the blood rushing back into her fingers. "Garrett wants to see you," Coleman said. "He is coming. 20 men, maybe more. 5 days. Then I will be here. You could run. That is what you do, right? Run and hide and let other people pay for your sins." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I am done running." Coleman laughed. "That is what they all say, right up until the shooting starts." He moved toward the door, his men following. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at Evelyn. "Nice store you got here, ma'am. Would be a shame if something happened to it. Something like fire." "Get out," Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous. Coleman left. The door swung shut behind him. Silence filled the store. Heavy, suffocating. Caleb holstered his gun, but his hands were shaking. "I am sorry," he said. "I never wanted this to come here. To come to you." Evelyn was still standing behind the counter, her hand still on her pistol. "Phoenix," she said slowly. "Coleman said you killed Garrett's brother. I told you that. You told me he came at you with a knife. You did not tell me he was the boss's actual brother. Blood family. Would it have made a difference? I do not know. Maybe." She walked out from behind the counter and stood in front of him. "Tell me everything," she said. "Everything you left out before. I need to know what we are dealing with." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he sat down heavily on a barrel of flour, like the weight of his past had finally become too much to carry. "Garrett found me when I was 19, he began. I was starving, literally dying in an alley in Tucson. He picked me up, fed me, gave me a bed. I thought he was a saint, but he was not. No, he was a monster who knew how to look like a saint. By the time I figured that out, I was already in too deep. I had done things, robbed people, hurt people. I could not just walk away. So what changed?" "Phoenix." Caleb's hands clenched into fists. He was worse than Garrett. At least Garrett had rules, codes. Phoenix was just evil. He liked hurting people, especially women. One night in Prescott, he cornered a girl in the saloon. She could not have been more than 17. I heard her screaming and something in me snapped. You stopped him. I tried to. He pulled a knife. We fought. I killed him. Caleb looked up at Evelyn with haunted eyes. I did not mean to. I just wanted to stop him. But he would not stop coming, and the knife was in my hand, and then it was in his chest. Evelyn sat down beside him. What about the girl? She ran. Cannot blame her. When I turned around, she was gone. No witness, no one to say it was self-defense. Just me standing over the body of Garrett's brother with a bloody knife. So you ran. What else could I do? Garrett would have killed me, slowly, painfully. He loved Phoenix, even knowing what he was. Blood is everything to him. And now he is coming here. Now he is coming here. Evelyn took his hand. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she said, I am not going to ask you to leave. And I am not going to pretend this does not scare me. But I need you to understand something. What? I have lost everything before. My father, my future, my faith in people. I survived. I rebuilt. I am still standing. She squeezed his hand. Whatever Garrett brings, we face it together. No more running. For either of us. Caleb stared at her. You are either the bravest woman I have ever met or the craziest. Probably both. She almost smiled. Now come on, we have work to do. They went to find Sheriff Dockery. The meeting in Sheriff Dockery's office lasted 3 hours. Caleb laid out everything he knew about Garrett, how the gang operated, how many men, what weapons they carried, their tactics, their strategies, their weaknesses. Dockery listened carefully, asking questions, taking notes. Evelyn sat in the corner, absorbing it all. They like to hit at dawn, Caleb said, when people are still groggy. They send scouts ahead to mark escape routes and identify anyone who might fight back. Then they come in hard and fast. How many men are we talking about? 20, maybe more. Garrett has been recruiting since I left. Dockery leaned back in his chair. And how many fighting men do we have in Dry Creek? Maybe a dozen who know which end of a rifle to point. Those are not good odds. No, sir, they are not. Evelyn spoke up. What about evacuation? Get the women and children out of town before they arrive. Dockery nodded slowly. That is smart. Patterson Ranch is a couple miles out. Stone walls, good defensible position. We could shelter the non-combatants there. And the men who stay? Caleb spread a rough map on the desk. Garrett expects resistance to fold when the shooting starts. He is used to hitting soft targets. Towns with no spine. He traced lines on the map. If we fortify the main buildings, create overlapping fields of fire, we can turn his advantage against him. He comes in expecting easy prey. Instead, he walks into a trap. Dockery studied the map. It could work, if people are willing to fight. Will they? That is the question. This town has never faced anything like this. Some folks will want to hand you over and hope Garrett leaves them alone. Evelyn's voice was sharp. Hand him over? Like a lamb to slaughter? Some people would rather sacrifice one man than risk their own necks. Human nature. Then we need to convince them otherwise, Caleb said quietly. This is not just about me. Garrett does not leave witnesses. He does not leave towns standing. If they give me up, he will burn Dry Creek anyway, just to prove he can. Dockery was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and extended his hand. All right, Roar. We do this your way. Town meeting tomorrow night. We lay out the situation, let people decide for themselves. But if we fight together. They shook on it. That night, Caleb lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling. The nightmares were worse than usual. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Garrett's face, heard Phoenix's dying gurgle, felt the blood on his hands. Around midnight, he gave up on sleep, started packing his saddlebags. He was going to run. Leave town in the dark, draw Garrett away, save these people who had nothing to do with his sins. He was halfway to the stable when a voice stopped him. Running again? He turned. Evelyn stood in the shadows, wrapped in a shawl against the night chill. I cannot let them die for me, Caleb said. So, you are just going to disappear. Let Garrett follow you. Follow. Leave us wondering what happened. I am trying to protect you. No, you're trying to protect yourself. From having to watch people suffer because of your choices. From having to stay and fight. She stepped closer. Running is not protection, Caleb. It is just a different kind of prison. You have been locked in it for 3 years. You do not understand. Then explain it to me. Caleb turned away. If I stay, people will die. Dockery, Martha, you. I cannot have that on my conscience. And if you run? Garrett comes anyway, burns the town to make a point. We die without even knowing why. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. You told me you were done running. Was that a lie? I meant it when I said it. Then mean it now. Her eyes were fierce in the moonlight, demanding, uncompromising. Stay. Fight. Let us face this together. And if we die, at least we die knowing we stood for something. Caleb felt something break inside him. Something that had been wound tight for years. He had been so alone for so long, carrying his guilt like a millstone around his neck, pushing everyone away because he did not believe he deserved connection. But Evelyn was not asking him to be a hero. She was not asking him to be perfect. She was just asking him to stay. Okay, he whispered. Okay. She did not hug him, did not kiss him, just nodded once, sharply. Good. Now put your bags back. We have a war to prepare for. They walked back to town together. When they reached the boarding house, Caleb stopped. Evelyn, thank you. For what? For believing I could be more than what I was. She almost smiled. Do not thank me yet. We still have to survive. But there was warmth in her voice. Warmth that had not been there before. She headed back to her store. Caleb watched her go, feeling something he had not felt in 3 years. Hope. The town meeting the next night was tense. Mayor Williams wanted to hand Caleb over. Several other townspeople agreed. Dockery and Evelyn argued fiercely against it. In the end, it was old Mr. Miller who settled the debate. I have lived 80 years, he said, standing slowly on arthritic legs. I have seen cowards and I have seen heroes. Roar here, he made mistakes. Who has not? But he came clean. He warned us. He offered to fight. Miller looked around the room. That is more than I can say for some of you. Hiding behind a stranger's blood to save your own skins. That is not the town I raised my children in. He turned to Dockery. Count me in, Sheriff. I have been shooting varmints for 60 years. Outlaws are just bigger varmints. The mood shifted. Others stepped forward, ranch hands and shopkeepers and farmers, men who had everything to lose and chose to fight anyway. By the end of the night, they had 18 volunteers, not enough to match Garrett's numbers, but enough to make a stand. Caleb stood before them all. Thank you, he said simply. I do not deserve your faith, but I will do everything in my power to prove it was not misplaced. Evelyn watched from the back of the room. When their eyes met, something passed between them, something that did not need words. The battle was coming, but they would face it together. The next 4 days were a blur of preparation. Evelyn organized the evacuation of women and children to Patterson Ranch. She coordinated supplies, medical equipment, ammunition. Her practical mind proved invaluable. While others panicked, she made lists and executed plans. Caleb trained the volunteers. Most of them had never been in a real fight. He taught them how to shoot from cover, how to reload under pressure, how to stay calm when bullets were flying. Some of them learned faster than others. Martha Hendricks refused to evacuate. I can shoot, she told Evelyn stubbornly. My daddy taught me when I was 6. And someone needs to cook for you idiots. You are staying because of Caleb, Evelyn said. Martha grinned. Maybe a little. But mostly I am staying because you are my best friend, and I am not leaving you. Evelyn hugged her tight. Did not say anything. Did not need to. Old Mr. Miller turned out to be a surprisingly good shot. 80 years of practice, he said, picking off tin cans from 50 yards. Outlaws are bigger than cans. Should be easier. Sheriff Dockery proved himself a natural leader. He positioned men at strategic points, created fallback positions, drilled the volunteers until they could follow orders in their sleep. But underneath the activity, fear simmered. People knew they were outmatched, knew that many of them might not survive. They tried to hide it, but Evelyn could see it in their eyes. The way they hugged their children a little longer, the way they looked at the horizon, waiting for the storm. The night before Garrett was expected to arrive, Evelyn found Caleb sitting alone on the roof of her store. "Mind if I join you?" He moved over to make room. She climbed up and sat beside him, both of them looking at the stars. They stayed like that for a long time, not talking, just existing together in the quiet. Finally, Caleb spoke. "I want to tell you something." Evelyn waited. "I came to Dry Creek because I was tired of running. I stayed because I found something worth staying for." He turned to face her. "You, Evelyn, you are what made me want to stop." "Caleb, let me finish. If I do not come back tomorrow, if Garrett kills me, I need you to know that these past weeks have been the happiest I have known since I was a boy. You gave me that. You gave me hope when I had forgotten what hope felt like." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. "You are not going to die tomorrow," she said. "You do not know that." "No. But I know that I am not losing you. Not after everything it took to find you." She reached up and touched his scarred cheek. "You are not the man you were 3 years ago. You have changed. I have seen it. I have seen. Dockery has seen it. This whole town has seen it. And whatever happens tomorrow, that matters. You matter." Caleb leaned into her touch. "I do not deserve you," he whispered. "Nobody deserves anything. We just do the best we can with what we have." She leaned in and kissed him. It was not gentle, not soft. It was fierce and desperate, full of everything they had been holding back for weeks. Fear and hope and desire and love, all tangled together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn pressed her forehead against his. "Do not die tomorrow," she said. "That is an order." "Yes, ma'am." They sat together until dawn started to lighten the sky. Not sleeping, not even talking much. Just holding each other while they could. Holding on to something precious before the world tried to take it away. As the first rays of sun crept over the horizon, a rider appeared on the edge of town. Coleman. Alone this time. He carried a white flag. Rode slowly down Main Street. Stopped in front of the sheriff's office. "Garrett sends a message," he called out. "He will be here at sunrise tomorrow. Roar, if you come out peacefully, he will let the town live. If you make him fight for it, he will burn everything to the ground." Caleb stepped out of the shadows. "Tell Garrett I will be waiting. But if he hurts anyone in this town, I will kill him with my bare hands." Coleman studied him. Something almost like respect flickered in his eyes. "You have changed, Roar. 3 years ago you would have run. 3 years ago I had nothing worth fighting for. And now you do." Caleb's eyes found Evelyn standing in the doorway of her store. "Now I do." Coleman nodded slowly. "For what it is worth, I never wanted this. Garrett's my boss, not my friend. But business is business." He turned his horse. "Sunrise tomorrow. Be ready." He rode away. Evelyn crossed the street and took Caleb's hand. "One more night," she said. "One more night." They spent it together. Not in the way novels describe, nothing scandalous or improper. They just talked about their childhoods, their dreams, the lives they might have lived if fate had been kinder. And when the sun came up, they were ready. Dawn came bloody and red. Evelyn watched the sun rise from behind the reinforced windows of her store, her pistol loaded and ready. Around her, the town held its breath. Then she heard them. Horses. Dozens of them. The thunder of hooves growing louder. Garrett's gang rode into Dry Creek like a plague descending. There were more than 20, closer to 30, hard men on hard horses, bristling with weapons. At their head rode Garrett himself. He was older than Evelyn expected, 50, maybe 55. Silver in his beard and lines carved deep around his eyes. But there was nothing soft about him. He sat his white horse like a king surveying conquered territory. His eyes found Caleb immediately. "Come out, son." Garrett's voice carried clear across the silent town. "Let us talk like civilized men." Caleb stepped into the street, alone, unarmed, as planned. It was a dangerous gamble. But they needed time. Needed Garrett distracted while Dockery's men got into position. Garrett dismounted and walked to meet him. They stood face to face in the middle of Main Street. 3 years, Garrett said. 3 years I have been looking for you. I know. Do you know what those 3 years cost me? The embarrassment, the questions, the weakness it showed when my own boy ran away. I am not your boy. I made you. Garrett's voice hardened. I found you dying in an alley. I fed you, clothed you, taught you everything you know. And this is how you repay me. You taught me to steal, to kill, to treat human beings like obstacles. I taught you to survive. No. You taught me to be a monster. Caleb's voice was quiet but steady. I will not apologize for leaving. Garrett's gang scrambled for cover, caught off guard by the ambush. Chaos exploded across Main Street. Caleb dove behind a water trough as bullets whizzed past his head. He drew his pistol and returned fire, dropping one of Garrett's men with a shot to the shoulder. Evelyn watched from her store, her heart in her throat. Then 3 gang members rushed her door. She did not hesitate. The first man through took a bullet to the chest. The second tripped over his falling body, and she shot him too. The third turned and ran. Evelyn's hands were shaking. She had just killed 2 men. But there was no time to process it. More were coming. Martha appeared beside her with a rifle. I told you I could shoot, she said, and proved it by dropping a gang member who was trying to flank their position. Outside, the battle raged. Dockery was everywhere, directing his men, calling out targets, holding the line. He moved with a grace that belied his age. Mr. Miller had taken position on a rooftop, his old rifle cracking steadily, each shot finding its mark. But Garrett's men were experienced. They regrouped quickly, using their superior numbers to press the attack. One by one, Dockery's volunteers started falling. Then someone set fire to the feed store. Flames leaped into the morning sky, spreading to the neighboring buildings. Smoke billowed across Main Street, turning the battlefield into a hellscape of orange light and choking darkness. Through the chaos, Caleb fought his way toward Garrett. The old man had retreated to a defensive position, directing his men with cold efficiency. Even now, even losing, he refused to yield. "Roar!" Garrett's voice cut through the gunfire. "Face me like a man!" Caleb emerged from the smoke. His shirt was torn. Blood ran from a gash on his forehead. But his eyes were clear. "Here I am." They faced each other across 10 feet of burning street. Father and son, creator and creation. Monster and the man who refused to become one. "You could have been great," Garrett said. "Could have been my heir. Everything I built, it would have been yours. I do not want what you built. It is soaked in blood. All empires are soaked in blood. That is how they grow. Then I do not want an empire." Garrett drew his gun. "Then you will die a nobody, maybe. But I will die knowing I chose something better." They fired at the same moment. Caleb felt the bullet tear through his side. Pain exploded through his body. He went down, but Garrett went down too. Caleb's shot had caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Through blurring vision, Caleb saw Garrett raising his gun again, saw the hatred in those cold eyes, saw death coming for him. Then another shot rang out. Garrett jerked, looked down at the hole in his chest, looked up at the woman standing behind Caleb. Evelyn. She was covered in soot and blood. Her hands were steady on Dockery's rifle. Her eyes were hard as stone. "That is for threatening to hurt me," she said, "and that is for trying to kill the man I love." She fired again. Garrett fell and did not get up. The gang broke. Without their leader, they scattered like leaves in a storm. Some surrendered. Most fled. It was over. Evelyn dropped the rifle and ran to Caleb. He was lying in the street, blood pooling beneath him. His face was pale. "Stay with me," she begged. Do not you dare die on me now." He smiled weakly. "Would not dream of it. You would just find some way to bring me back and kill me yourself." "Damn right I would." She pressed her hands against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Someone was shouting for the doctor. Someone else was crying. Caleb reached up and touched her face. "I love you," he whispered. "Should have said it sooner. Say it again later, when you are healed, when we are old and gray and sitting on our porch complaining about our joints." "Yes, ma'am." His eyes closed. But he was still breathing. He was still breathing. Caleb Rohr woke 3 days later to find Evelyn asleep in a chair beside his bed. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, hair escaping its pins, her dress wrinkled and stained. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He tried to sit up. Pain shot through his side and he gasped. Evelyn jerked awake instantly. "Do not move, you idiot. Doctor said you lost half your blood." "How long was I out?" 3 days. I aged 10 years. Caleb reached for her hand. She took it, squeezing tight. "What happened?" "We won. Barely. 4 of our men dead, including—" She hesitated. "Including Sheriff Dockery." Caleb closed his eyes. "Dockery. He died saving me. Jumped in front of a bullet meant for me. That sounds like him." They sat in silence, grieving together. Finally, Evelyn spoke again. "Garrett is dead. Most of his gang either died or ran. Coleman surrendered. He is in custody waiting for the territorial marshal. And the town? Damaged but standing. We lost 3 buildings to the fire, but everyone else survived because of Dockery, because of you, because of us, all of us." She leaned forward and kissed him gently. "Welcome back," she whispered against his lips. It took another month for Caleb to heal. Evelyn nursed him through it, refusing to leave his side for more than an hour at a time. Martha helped at the store. The whole town pitched in. There was a funeral for Dockery and the 3 other men who died. The whole town attended. Caleb stood at the grave, leaning on Evelyn for support, and said goodbye to the man who had given him a second chance. The territorial marshal arrived a week later. He took statements, reviewed the evidence, and declared Caleb Rohr a hero. "From what I can see," the marshal said, "you risked your life to warn this town and then fought to defend it. Any crimes you committed with the Garrett gang are hereby pardoned." Caleb shook his hand but said nothing. He did not feel like a hero. He just felt tired and grateful. So incredibly grateful to be alive. As summer turned to fall, Dry Creek rebuilt. The burned buildings rose from their ashes, stronger than before. New families moved in, drawn by the story of the town that had stood up to outlaws. Evelyn's store reopened with a new sign above the door, "Hail and Roar General Store." Caleb stared at it for a long time. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I know. I wanted to. Partners in everything, remember?" They were married on a crisp October morning. Small ceremony. Just friends and neighbors crowded into the rebuilt church. Martha cried through the whole thing. Mr. Miller served as witness. When the preacher asked if Caleb took this woman to be his wife, he did not hesitate. "I do. More than anything." And when Evelyn was asked the same question, she smiled. "I do. Even though he is stubborn and reckless and terrible at taking care of himself. You love that about me." "God help me, I do." They kissed to cheers and applause, 6 months later. Evelyn stood on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Behind her, she could hear Caleb moving around the kitchen, attempting to cook dinner. He was terrible at cooking. She loved him anyway. "You are going to burn that," she called over her shoulder. "I am not going to burn it." There was a pause. Then the smell of smoke. "Okay, maybe I burned it a little." She laughed and went inside to rescue their meal. They ate together at their small table, same as they did every night. Talked about the store, about the town, about nothing and everything. Some nights, Caleb still had nightmares. He would wake, gasping, reaching for a weapon that was not there. Evelyn would hold him until his breathing steadied, remind him where he was, remind him he was safe. Some nights, Evelyn still woke in a cold sweat, convinced that Daniel had come back, that everything good in her life was about to be stolen again. Caleb would pull her close and tell her he was not going anywhere, would never go anywhere, would stay right here until she believed him. They were not perfect. They were not healed, but they were healing together. A letter arrived from Coleman, who had been sentenced to 2 years in the territorial prison. Garrett was right about one thing. You found someone worth keeping. Hope I find the same someday. When I get out, I am heading west, far away from everything we were. Caleb wrote back. Good luck. Everyone deserves a second chance. Spring came. The town bloomed. Martha got engaged to a young rancher from the next county. Mr. Miller celebrated his 81st birthday with a shooting contest that he won handily. And one evening, as they sat on their porch watching the stars come out, Evelyn told Caleb something that changed everything. I am pregnant. Caleb went very still. We are going to be parents. Yes. He swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. I'm going to be a father. You are going to be a wonderful father. He set her down gently, his hand moving to rest on her stomach. I never thought I would have this, he said quietly. A home, a family, someone who loves me despite everything I was, because of everything you became. She kissed him softly. This is our happy ending, Caleb Roar, the one we fought for, the one we earned. He smiled, that real smile that still made her heart skip. No, he said. This is not the ending. This is just the beginning. They stood together on their porch, looking out at the town that had given them both a second chance, at the future spreading before them, full of possibility and hope. The cowboy who everyone wanted had chosen the woman who never chased him, and they lived, not happily ever after, because that is not how real life works, but happily enough, with scars and nightmares and arguments and make-up kisses, with a love that had been forged in fire and came out stronger for it. She never chased him, and because of that, he stopped running. Forever. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.